Yeah, everyone, thanks for joining the Revizto webinar today. And I'm gonna, my name is Brett Settles. I'll be doing Q&A, and I'm gonna hand it over to Travis and John to get this thing going.
Yeah, so what we're here today for, obviously, is using Revizto to educate across teams. So anybody that was here a minute ago or whatever, you heard us talking about homeschooling and the influx of everything that parents are now expected to do. So I thought it'd be kind of cool to play along with that and throw it back to elementary school with our theme here. Who we are. I myself am Travis Althouse. I am the MEP Implementation Manager for Revizto, and I'm here with Jonathan Marsh with Steel Toe Consulting. Jonathan, say hello.
Yeah, I am with Steel Toe Consulting. I'm a technologies consultant for the MEP industry and do consulting for both software and contractors. But up until last year, I was working with Travis on actual jobs, and so we have a good background together, somewhat of a good background together, working jobs, and so we're really looking forward to this. And we were also saying before this that over the last year in particular, being more intentional about using Revizto as an educational tool for our teams has become something that's started to work its way into my consulting life, and I'm watching it sort of have an impact at some of the firms that I'm consulting with.
Yep, and one could actually say that John used Revizto to educate me, you know, in a lot of ways, and that's kind of what I'm chomping at the bit to talk about, because I really am grateful for my whole team that embraced the use of this and really accelerated everybody on the team in what we could do. Go ahead. Do you have something?
No, you can go ahead and start going over the agenda for the day.
Yeah, so here's our agenda. We're going to talk about accelerated learning for your BIM teams, field teams, fab teams, kind of, that's what I'm talking about, and how I kind of jumped into the fire, and all my team members were embracing it and were able to teach me from a bunch of different perspectives. We're also going to talk about how you're able to skyrocket your team's learning and understanding of Revit, constructability, and fabrication. It can seem like a daunting task to bring on Revit and new people and Revizto and all of these other softwares. We're going to talk about how Revizto can help you kind of fine tune that and make it a rocket instead of just a massive explosion. You know, you want to have some trajectory. We're also going to talk about the dynamic world of the foreman and the world that they live in out there, and how everything is changing constantly, and why active learning is crucial to have success on these jobs, especially big multi-year jobs. We're going to talk about communicating and understanding the tools of the job and the reality of the job. Totally different aspects, and you have to take both into consideration when you're making your plan. And we're going to talk about, most importantly, how Revizto is a real training tool, and it allows you to consult and teach and learn even when you're not directly on a job or not directly responsible for any production on that job. So first off, Revizto as a real training tool. We've got a traditional training method here that we follow, and I'm going to show that because that's kind of what, when I showed up to work for John, that's kind of what happened, and then we refined it in these other ones. I'm going to let John talk about those, but here's is pretty much the traditional training method. Just right into the deep end aggressively. You know, I feel like a lot of people can relate to that video. That definitely sums up how a lot of people in BIM feel jumping into a job like that. But John, do you want to go ahead and talk about some of the current training methods?
Yeah. I mean, right now, I think what was most interesting when we started talking about how we're using Revizto as sort of an active training platform was what we're actually doing for training for our teams is usually pretty minimal. It's usually very much like what Travis just pointed out. It's like throwing people into the deep end. And that's because a lot of what we're trying to get them can't be learned in books. It needs to be learned experientially. But when you think about it, what are the ways we're doing? We're doing lunch and learns, and we're saying, hey, why don't you go do a lunch and learn, and you'll eat some food, and you'll probably half pay attention to what's being done there. And we'll have in some salesmen or some different people to try to train you. And there's some effectiveness to that. And certainly I'm a big proponent of doing a lunch and learn almost every day. But it's not the same thing as learning on a job with a collaboration team. Also weekly trainings, we're bringing in experts occasionally. But these things are few and far between. I mean, I would say actually from my personal standpoint, 9 times out of 10, I'm having to tell people to go watch a video. And the problem with the video, like everybody knows, is there's no interaction at all. And there's little chance that video is going to be directly relevant to the situations that your new people are in, and that's been really huge for us, is to say, okay, so if we're getting training at most weekly, because really that's what usually maybe one lunch and learn or something, we're doing some organized training maybe once a week. Can we make it so that training is a part of the day-to-day environment? And that's when me and Travis started talking about the way this had actually worked, and when me and some others talked about the way that they wanted it to work in their firms, of being an everyday active thing where they're keeping coordination going, keeping the job in collaboration mode, but also taking a step back to say, okay, so here are the collaborative situations that are sort of a chance for education. You know what I mean? My wife is who again homeschools all the time, is constantly saying this is a teachable moment, and pulling the kids aside to do something, because if you're homeschooled, there's active life and there's working on things, but you don't separate out education as much as we do when we do weekly training and videos and lunch and learns. What we should be doing is saying, okay, so we have this cool collaboration platform. Let's look for teachable moments within this to start bringing our people up to speed. And I think we should talk about the points at this point, Travis.
The points?
Yeah, can you zoom back out for a second? Yeah, because I already got into like why is Revizto different a little bit. Mm-hmm. But is there anything you want to say, especially about how we kind of got going on saying, well, I think this is actually the right education platform?
Well, the big thing for me is that open dialogue. So I had mentioned that there's a dynamic world that your foremen live in. Well, once you get into the contracting level, there is no there is still a design team and a field team, but in all reality, you're the same team. And if I don't have that open, constant, hey, there's this thing, if it's wrong, is there a reason? If I don't have that constantly coming up, I'm not going to learn from my mistakes. I'm going to make the same mistakes a ton of times. In all reality, I'm going to teach 20 other guys to do it the same way, So having that open dialogue to me is the big thing that is happening in education now. Something I thought was really interesting that John and I talked about in preparing this was the fact that in that picture you can kind of see the fact that books are kind of dwindling, where the chance to find the answer you need in a book is starting to go away. It's almost like somebody knows that, hey, people aren't really using books like that anymore, And that's where we're able to take something like Revizto, that's an integrated collaboration platform, and really tie everything together and kind of write our own book. I thought it was interesting to say, where's the book on when a submittal gets sent to the wrong place and never gets updated, so the wrong pump gets installed, There is no book on that. The book is Revizto. If you guys were communicating in Revizto, now we have a book of what not to do. We see exactly where that submittal went wrong,
So I do have a question, and it's to both of you, and I'd like for you guys to kind of answer this together because of your experience. So I spent a long time in the Autodesk channel, and one of the ways that we trained people when we were in the Autodesk channel was the 3-day, let's learn every button that ever existed in the software in 3 days, and then everyone go back to work, and this should work perfectly, right? Okay, so everyone in this room, including both of you, know that. Then, so you've got that type of training versus the little tidbits of training. And that's something that I'd like for you guys to comment on the effectiveness of that. But the other thing I'd like for you guys to comment on is how using this platform accelerated the knowledge of the skill sets that used to be so separated, right? You know, BIM and technology people have usually spent their whole career learning that type of technology because it takes that long to cultivate that skill set. Mm-hmm. Same thing with the foreman. But ultimately, these people have to know each other's jobs and what's important to them. So how did that work out for you guys?
Well, can I go back to your first question? Because I just had a great example of sort of the difference between using a platform for teaching and learning and doing the one-day seminar. I have an intern that just started at one of the firms I work with, and we were starting them simple. We're like, hey, you know, we need some families of this expansion tank and a couple other things. And I said, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to go and make the family. And he had a little family class that was based on a video. And I said, go ahead, we're using Revizto in this company. Go ahead, upload that family to Revizto so that I can review it and see what it looks like. Does this look right? Does it have the right connectors? Does it have the right parametric data? I can check all that from in there, and I can also make some comments. And while I'm doing that, I'm showing them, okay, you have to now understand how to upload. You have to understand how to read my comments, how to respond, how to watch. And I thought this is a great situation in which I can assign a small project that will help him learn the upload, download of Revizto. And then when he came back to me after my first comments, I started to expand it. And I said, okay, well, I know that you took all the dimensions off of a PDF that you got online. Why don't you line that PDF up with your model and show me how that works? And he's like, what do you mean? It's like, well, we can go ahead and take any PDF and upload it to Revizto, and then we can align it to the model you just created to show that you properly represented all the dimensions that I asked you to represent. And we did that. So we got like this progressive learning thing, but by the end, not only had he built us the right expansion tank, but he had shown that he understood how to upload, download, how to overlay a PDF, how to move actions back and forth. And we had created a pretty extensive chat stream of information about building families and models. And what we decided to do at the end of that is we decided to dedicate that project, that Revizto project, to family creation and item creation. That is creating the small components that we're going to need in our jobs and giving us a place to look at them and see that they're validated. And it was a really good workflow. It was a really good experience for him in getting used to the software. And it was a task-oriented one. He actually came back and texted me after. He said this was the perfect way to learn how to not only use Revizto, but to be more fluid in the project, because he went immediately into another project and started working on it with the skills he had just learned. So I did want to cover that. Like when you're starting people that are new to your firm, getting them in there quickly and starting to use that as a way that you assign tasks and review tasks, super powerful, because it forms a dialogue that's written down and recorded of what's going on. Travis, maybe you can take the second one that was a little bit more about the understanding that the foreman is bringing to the team as we're learning.
Yeah, for sure. I'm actually going to say John did the exact same thing with me. Like first week, it was here's the room. We need to connect those pumps with that heat exchange, or those pumps with that heat exchanger and this air separator. Go, you know. And I jumped in, and I came from an engineering background, so I was like, oh, I got this. It's easy, you know. I did it once, and then I took it down to the fab shop, and Joe's just like, what are you thinking? What are you doing? You know, why would you do this? Why do we have this pipe going over this way? How am I supposed to attach this to the wall? It's got all these constructability things that I didn't understand. So I immediately saw the need for Joe to kind of be over my shoulder. And we talk about a keyword, shoulder tapping a lot. It's really annoying if you're out in the fab shop fabbing something and somebody's tapping you on the shoulder like, hey, why is the expansion loop 3 feet? You know, we don't want that. With Revizto, I was able to eliminate that. And essentially, I I was able to essentially eliminate that and jump into getting the information directly from my fab manager or his team, or even better, the PM. My PM was a blessing, and he actually went in and identified on the PNIDs. He took screenshots of the PNID of what valves I was missing, and why, and highlighted it and put it into Revizto. And in this exercise that normally would have been us sitting down, basically shoulder tapping each other for an hour or two, now just became a dialogue in Revizto over like a week or two. And now I was able to, just like John said, save it off and hand it off to any new people that came in, or take it to the foreman when it came to time to install and the foreman was questioning the way we fabbed some stuff. I was able to take him that record of everything that we had done. I was able to show him, hey, this is why we did that. Please don't move that expansion loop over there. You're going to cost us a ton of money, and this is why we saw it. So it goes to this fact down here about it being immersive. The whole time you're in this conversation, it's not just immersive in virtual reality type of thing. You're actually immersed in the conversation and in everything you do, and then you're able to record and send that off to teach others,
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's weird sometimes. As a manager, I've noticed that people aren't always in favor of sort of letting people roll with things because they'd like them to have this class or that class before they start. With an environment that's this collaborative, it really is possible to let people roll a little bit more, knowing that you're going to have some changes, some feedback, but getting them involved with that group where they're sort of self-electing the people that are going to be their instructors. Like when Travis walked down to talk to the fab shop foreman, he knows that this is the instructor that I'm going to need to get this fabrication piece right. And that idea of electing the instructors is something that we thought was really important in terms of understanding and being intentional about education as we go.
Right.
I would tell you this, so from a manager standpoint, if you're spending time learning, I'd rather you spend time learning and drafting. That way or modeling, that way I can take advantage of what you're actually doing. You know what I mean? I can take advantage of the fact that you are working on the project and all we are really doing is steering what you already have as knowledge towards where we want to go. And so when we were putting this together, Travis kind of asked me what were the key things I thought in using Revizto that are important. If you're a manager, if you're using Revizto, what do you want to make sure you're doing? Well, I think everybody who manages people knows when someone comes in that's new, it's really hard to figure out where they're at in terms of their knowledge. They might be really knowledgeable in one area, but totally lacking somewhere else. So I'd really encourage people, like when you start someone new, to right away start putting them in projects that allow you to make a good assessment of where they're at. I have worked with people that are really good coordinators that can't do mechanical rooms. And until I started watching the issues in Revizto as a manager, I didn't realize that. But when you're watching the issues and you realize that, Tony has 10 questions on coordinating the entire first floor, but has 50 questions on coordinating the mechanical closet, it's pretty easy to see where he needs education. Also, if you're putting in a new system, the same thing, you know what I mean? Like Steam systems, you don't even need to sort of go out and say, do you understand Steam? It's going to naturally occur as they're making issues that you can see, like some of the problems that they're having with Steam.
So John, that brings up a good point in that, I think a big key part of this is that a lot of people track issues, and we've tracked issues in the industry for as long as I've been part of it, right? But, seeing a list of issues on an Excel spreadsheet doesn't give you that insight into discovering your team's actual abilities. The conversations do.
Yeah, and you grab one of the dashboards and just set up the dashboard to read off certain triggers, and you can pull a really good look at the reality of the data on the people doing the job. I would say in order to do that, please always set up to standard tags in your company. If your company is using tags, you want to have a standard tags list, okay? You want to have a standard tags list, not so that everybody does the same thing, but so when you go into the dashboard, you have some way to sort of see what's going on. And without a standards tags list, that can be a little tougher. I think the other thing to remember, and it goes back to that immersive part, is we've never had the ability to talk so clearly about a model as when you're able to mark up, move around a model, and even move other people inside the model. I can't tell you how many times I watched Travis and other people sitting there going back and forth, basically moving the model around for one another to get a real understanding. You know what I mean?
Yep.
The other things I had as key points for managers out there, I just want to run them real quick. Partnering and mentoring. Find a mentor for anybody that comes into your company. Hook them up on Revizto as someone that they can ask questions to. And people who are asking questions, if you feel uncomfortable about it, hit the privacy notification. You can make those issues private between you and your mentor. But you lose one thing when you do that. Naturally, Revizto crowdsources, because you can see the areas that have a lot of issues. And if you're navigating the model and see that, you start going, well, what the hell's wrong in this area? And it sort of allows you an opportunity to address questions that you might not have known were questions. I've definitely gone through models and saw a million issues around a certain thing, only to discover that that entire area was wrong. And that's why it's causing so many problems. So if you are going to do things privately, just make sure it's necessary, because other than that, crowdsourcing is awesome. And don't be afraid to do learning assignments like I did with the intern. And the last thing I would say is just make sure as you're gathering all of this that you start to build out areas where you can send somebody to go look. Good sandboxes, good past projects. You don't have to archive projects all the time. They give you a ton of projects to work with. So leave them open and allow them to be used as learning tools. So Travis, what did you think as a student, what did you think sort of the key things were for you? I know we talked a little bit about it and you said you were going to come up with some interesting ones.
Yeah, so some of the main points that I really leveraged as a student of Revizto was having that content at my fingertips. Just like John just said, the ability to actually see, like John, who was the lead coordinator at the very beginning of the job, you know, to see his conversations with the GC, with the engineer, and all of that, and being able to actually have that right then and there, so that if somebody 2 years later, when we're going to install something, says, hey, this should be this way, we always do it this way, I was able to quickly find and isolate, hey, no, we decided it had to be this way because of this, you know. I didn't have to dig. I didn't have to go get John for a special meeting. I didn't need John at all. I could actually just jump in there and screenshot it or tag everybody and say, hey, here's where we decided that we're going to do it this way. And here's why, you know, and being able to have that, and then being able to learn, because a lot of the time I was working with apprentices and stuff, you know, that still weren't fully, they were still learning just as much as I was. So it was really nice to be able to build that confidence in each other. Not so much just to point the finger and be able to be right all the time, you know, but being able to have confidence in each other and know, hey, this BIM guy knows what he's talking about. He's not just throwing stuff out there because of whatever. He's going out, he's getting the answers, he's learning how and why to do it. And a lot of times those were the guys that at the end of the project, those were the guys that I was going to get that information. So having that direct line, being able to have those quick videos, you know, like having the field guy just walk through and say, hey, we can't go in this area over here. If I walk down this hallway, we can't get in there because it's already fire stopped. We need to go around this building. Those quick little videos that I could have to learn the how and why just accelerated everything. And I didn't need to drive an hour to get out on site, you know, to see, because that's what all that would happen is you drive out there and then you get angrily taken to the spot and it's like, that, how is that going to fit, you know? Whereas instead with something like Revizto, I have those pictures, those videos, and I can actually bring in like an intern. I can bring in a detailer or something, you know, to where I don't need to spend all of my time spinning the wheels. It's like, oh crap, we didn't get that pipe in before it was fireproof or sprayed or something. We need to go around. here's all the information. Here, intern or whoever, please fix these spools, you know. Being able to do that and pass that knowledge along was a huge key to success. And also with that, that enabled my initiative, you know, that made me want to do that. Instead of it being this big battle that I have to go get John and 3 other people in a room to argue about or something, instead, I now have the ability to collect all of this and give a nice, neat report to the people that need to see it. And then now I feel very accomplished, you know. I just bypassed that bottleneck on my own. I feel great about the job I did. We installed it right. We designed it right. The rest of the team, as far as the other trades and everything, they see that banter too. And so they can understand, hey, these guys put a lot of time into doing this. Let's not put our walls up first, you know. Let's listen to the MEP guy and give them what they need. They're putting in the time and effort here, you know.
I think one of the things that I forgot that I thought was really good is, so when I was trying to manage, so as you're bringing in more and more modeling, I hope everybody is starting to whittle away at the paper we produce. Like at the amount of analog data that we produce is just horrible anyways. So we're whittling away at that. But what I found was I was constantly telling people, go look at the example drawing, go look at the example drawing, but it was wrong all the time because it was evolving all the time. What I had done over like the last 6 months, I had to do this a number of times with different people, is I've gone in to a different project with a completed spool map and a completed spool sheet, a completed assembly sheet. And I put a little issue on that saying, you know, check this out. This is what I want it to look like, you know? So instead of having to figure out what our company's standard is and maintain it, and I'm able to go directly to what the client wants to see, add an issue, point it at somebody and say, go check that out. I found that really powerful. Corona, definitely Corona.
Get a ventilator over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because that did happen often. So we're going back to that dynamic world, you know, with everybody. I would assume everybody here has experienced it at some point or another where there's a fire, you know. There's fires all the time, and the ability to do something like that. Like John would tell me to do something on a Monday, not even remember telling me to do it, and then I had it done on Thursday with full understanding, and I had like I said, my PM, I worked with the PM to get the PNIDs and everything. By Thursday, I'm explaining to John why that example might be wrong or need refined, you know. Again, it's that initiative. It's enabling the ability to actually hand out work, but then you actually enable those people to have the initiative to get the right answers on their own. Because John wouldn't have known. John wouldn't have been able to dig into the PNIDs or whatever, you know. It's just, for the most part, here's a basic example that applies to 9 out of 10 things. Well, we all have that 1 out of 10 things that just doesn't work in any way, shape, or form on every job. And this allows you to kind of get around that to where it's not somebody like John holding up the whole thing, you
know? Yeah, and we're talking about some really dynamic environments, like you said, you know. So if I show you something that's close to what I'm looking for, you know, I wrote an entire article once on how design for manufacturing looks, and the fact that you look at more and more design for manufacturing skids, assemblies, this and that, and that's how you really learn how to be good at it, is actually by exposure. And you know, this is a great example where you can pop through and say, here are 20 good examples of how to put in a mixing valve that are very, very consistent. And that really, really, really helps. I saw one question come in, and I have to just comment real quick. They asked a question about scheduling more than one export a day, which is really cool to keep those field guys to have the best, you know, information they can have. But I would also tell you, you know, Travis was talking about those quick fires that come up. When you make an issue in Revizto from Revit, the thumbnail is from Revit. It's not from Revizto. So if you need something that you are currently working on, but you don't want to have to do a whole upload, just make sure when you're addressing that issue, go into Revit to make the issue. We'll make that thumbnail right there and give you that update. It might save you having to update a lot more from one thing to another.
Yeah, and to second that, that was actually another really cool exercise that I was a part of across teams. I would actually set up like, so that exercise I was doing earlier with the pump, getting the pump to the heat exchanger and putting the expansion loop in, I would actually send it out as a separate Revizto project, you know, because I knew I was learning so much about fabrication, and we were trying to perfect, we were trying to make something replicable. Is that a word? Something you can replicate. You're trying to make something like a toilet carrier bank or racks in the hallway. We were trying to make something where we could just make 100 of them and know that they're going to be able to be shipped to all different jobs, you know, have them on stock. So to do that, I knew that like in the end, we were going to have kind of a end product, you know, so I'd make it its own Revizto project. And then I would invite my field and fabrication team members to communicate and work on it with me. You know, why do we use this gauge of steel? Why is it this far off the floor? Do we want to make our standard wall carriers instead of floor carriers? That type of thing that I didn't really even know what it meant. I just knew that I had to get to that level of detail, you know, and I knew that those field guys know it without even knowing they know it. So throwing that in front of them, throwing that in 3D in front of them makes them immediately just like, hey, I can't reach that valve. What are you thinking? You know? And then it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't know you had to reach the valve, you know? Rookie mistakes that all BIM guys make, but it worked itself out because of this one right here, leveraging those instructors, knowing that those are the people with the knowledge. Why even try to look it up in a book? Why try to dig through all of this? You know, your PM is going to have a pretty close, intimate knowledge of the job. Your estimators especially are going to have a close, intimate knowledge of the job. Your fab shop's going to have probably built that thing 500 times. Same with your field team. So why not just go to them, you know, make them all a part of that project, that process. Then the estimators can say, hey, I didn't bid that 20-inch T. We need to make that a threadlet, you know. I didn't put it in the budget to have a 20-inch stainless T. That's gonna end the project immediately, you know. And that's where the big thing that I struggled with, because I didn't have that direct knowledge of the constructability of everything, was, okay, well, why is it a threadlet instead of a T, you know? And a lot of times what is missed when they're teaching that is it's like, oh, it's in the spec. Well, that's not always the case. You don't always have to go by the spec. Sometimes there's some allowance to put in a threadlet instead of a T. What I needed to know was that it's cheaper, a lot cheaper, you know, takes less time. There's one weld instead of 3, that type of stuff. And so by them communicating in this platform, they didn't even know that they needed to teach me that. I learned it by, I call osmosis, you know. I saw the estimator talking to the PM about, hey, how are we going to quality check these welds? And then I was like, oh, you know what? That's why it's better. You just learn by osmosis, you know.
Well, it's also bringing in the expertise of others that's really important. I would say this, you know, like when my BDC team started getting excited, they did a great job of taking it out to others and finding the people that they wanted to collaborate with.
Yes.
And so also remember, if you are managing BDC and you are trying to use this more for education, maybe the class that you should have, instead of having the lunch and learn on something specific, is how do I get good instructors for the things that I want to do? And how do I get people onboarded? Like, half the time, it sounds silly, half the time it's spending 15 minutes with them, getting them started, having them find a problem that they have that we can solve with Revizto that gets them onboarded, and now they're an instructor. But before we get too far down the road, I wanted to give one more example of how we were using it that Travis might not have been around for. Is I got from foremen on a pretty constant basis questions about how to install something that were way deeper than what you show on the drawings. So I will tell you that I typically was sitting there, even though they have access to the O&M manuals in some weird way and could probably go find them, they definitely were using me and others as triage, where they'd be like, hey, can you just upload the installation instructions and tag it to the
our fault.
Yeah, and you know, if you're sitting at a desk, your BDC, it takes all of 2 minutes for you to do that. You pop into the drawing, you add the installation construction, and it's perfect. That's how you're going to install this. And what's funny is I did that at least twice, where they took the installation instructions, were looking through them, then did a screen capture to produce another issue that said, hey, when you designed this, you obviously didn't read the installation instructions.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
you got your check valve backwards, you know. It's things like that too, where it's you know, at the end of the day, the foreman has to have it installed and working. No one has more accountability on the job than the foreman, because he can't, like, if it's broke, he can't walk away. If it's not working, he can't walk away.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think Revizto really helps for from an educational standpoint is it helps your designers not be able to walk away. That foreman has their ear until it's installed, which means they're going to hear about the problems, which can be bad if you were phone calls. Phone calls are bad. Revizto is not phone calls. Revizto is transactional. Okay. This is a transactional way to talk about a project. This is wrong. We're going to make it right. It's not personal, real transactional. I think that helps too. A lot of stuff that people don't tell you is because you made a mistake and they don't want to upset you. When it's in Revizto, it's not a big deal. You don't feel like you're being called out because of a mistake. And I really, really, really encourage people, every problem you see, put it in Revizto. Managers, don't go hit people for every problem.
Yeah.
Realize that that's part of that learning experience, and what makes collaborative environments so effective at doing this is you're learning with a big class, man. You have a big class with lots of instructors.
Yeah, and directly with that, I mean, I found out, sadly, that I laid out like dozens of check valves, hopefully not in the hundreds, but I laid out dozens of them the wrong way before I even knew that there was a directional thing. You know, in engineering, it's just a symbol. You never really, I mean, sometimes you pay attention to that arrow, but usually you just slap the symbol on, you know. And the way I found out was that somebody walked into a training. I was teaching people Revizto, and they walked into a training and they said, you expect me to listen to you using this software when when you put all your check valves in backwards, you know? He said this in front of the whole class, and I was just like, yes, thank you. That's the point. I've been doing all these check valves wrong, and you guys just fix it and you don't tell me. And then you just, when you finally call me, you just want to strangle me, you know? You think I'm doing it on purpose. And that's where I made Revizto into a verb. If you called me and were strangling me through the phone, first thing I asked was, did you Revizto it? Because that's the key. You don't know what you don't know. You know, I say that all the time. If you don't know, it's just simple that you don't know. But to somebody who's installing these all the time, like every day, somebody who doesn't put the check valves in right, you think is an idiot. You immediately not have respect for them. You know, they don't know how to do their job. But in reality, it's just that they live in a different world. And you telling them that one time, they told me one time, and I never got another one wrong. It was as simple as that. You know, which way does the V face? That was, they told me that, and boom, I learned. And they told me in Revizto, so it was amazing. But I made that verb, did you Revizto it, for that same reason.
You know what I thought was cool? One of probably my favorite things, at least recently, was I started to see more and more CEOs going into the model when it's this easy. Like when you say to people, you're going to go install Navisworks and all this other stuff, really, there's a lot that's to that. Like if you want to get somebody involved in a model, you're like, okay, well, I got to install Navisworks. I got to keep it up to date. Then I got to install the issue tracker. Then I got to install the this, that, other thing, PDF viewer. The fact that it all comes together in one, I've seen more and more CEOs popping around a model, because you can see when your CEO is in there, like a little name will come up on the bottom. And I'll tell you right now, that means a lot to the team that's working on the project, to know that their CEO is in there. But what I'm also finding out is most of these CEOs have been doing this so long that if you let them go in a model for 20 minutes, they will go ahead and just find a ton of stuff that they can fix for you. It's like, oh, well, we can buy a new tool to bevel all those ends for you. It's automated. Well, why didn't we, you know, I was sort of amazed at how democratizing the effect of Revizto was on some of the upper levels of management that just haven't had model access before. It would always be, if you want a meeting about the model, have somebody come in and fly the model for you, right? You got to fly the model for the person because they don't know how to use it. And I've noticed with this more and more, I pop in and we'll see a CEO sitting there kind of making issues and looking through the model. And even if they're not making issues, at least they're in there, they're involved with their team. They can see what their team's doing and where they're at. And I think that's really, again, one of those powerful things, because CEOs have a lot more to teach us on the VDC side, on the technology side, than you think about what can be done, because they ultimately can decide to buy a piece of manufacturing equipment to totally change how we're building. You know, so it just recently in particular, I've started to notice that and just thought it was really powerful, especially on some of the larger, more complex jobs.
Yeah, or they could buy a powerful piece of software, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That also helps. To go with what John said there, as you can see, I'm marking up a little 3D model here of a unnecessary spool, you know. And you guys can see Revizto right now, right, John?
Oh, yeah.
So you can see I actually threw colors in here, and going along with what he said with owners being in here, it's amazing to have an owner come in here and they find stuff that's subjective, you know, like, why are these different colors and this one's not? You know, that owner just found something that would probably prevent us from getting this on a truck. That might put us over the weight limit or over the size limit or whatever. And just simply these visual cues of being able to be in here in 3D looking around is going to save you money. And a big thing, so the reason I did these colors is actually because one of the worst things that I did consistently all the time, because I didn't understand welding at all whatsoever, was I would put my welds here. And come to find out, it's the vertical welds that are cheaper and easier to go around than a horizontal weld. These, the flux kind of drips down. Now these are Vicolic couplings, but if this was a field weld, the flux would drip down and they'd have to put a few bands of weld on that to be able to get it to seal up right and pass the test, you know. Whereas usually this is 1 or 2 passes. So something as simple as that too, when you're learning, when you have, instead of it being drawings, you know, because we're used to seeing something like, if I go over here and open a spool, we're used to seeing that. How do you know where the weld is? You have no idea. This is getting approved and sent out to the field with no knowledge of anything that's going on with this, you know. But then with Revizto, and like I said, I took it a step further and put the colors, but what we started doing was you could slap this overlay on, and now I can see where my welds are, you know, even if I didn't have those colors in there.
You can see if your hand will fit.
What's that?
You can see if your hand's going to fit in there.
Exactly.
Are you going to be able to get it in place? I mean, it always looks like a spool's going to fit when the spool's on the spool sheet, because it doesn't show you the context.
Yep.
Like, this shows you the context. I would also say, if you send somebody with minimal experience to go ahead and break up spools, but you gave them this as an example, they're going to get further than they would get without it. I'm telling you right now, you're going to get way further with this than they would without it.
Yeah, without it, there's just point and shoot. Point and shoot and print 10,000 times and hope they don't come upstairs.
And how are you even going to explain this to somebody? I'd like to break it every 3 to 8 feet, and maybe at 90s, but maybe not, and maybe on top, but maybe not, maybe left, but maybe right.
Right.
I mean, having a visual example of how we want it done and how it was done adjacent to it, super great step for giving this understanding. And that's that immersive thing again. That's just super powerful.
In that dynamic world too that we're talking of. So I have stories for days. Anybody that knows me knows I have tons of stories. I remember everything. But another thing that happened was we were actually taking a spool out that was going on a roof of a building. I thought nothing of it, you know. The rule of thumb was what, every 20 foot, I think, is how we were splitting spools. Like, if it was copper or steel, it was every 20 foot.
Yeah.
If it was plastic, it was like 40 foot maybe or something. Pretty basic rules of thumb, you know. So that's what I got by. We limped through it, but we did the whole building really well. And then we got up to the roof, and my foreman at that point was really well versed in Revizto and able to identify these mistakes. We had a good relationship. I was humble. He knew that I didn't know all of the answers to everything, you know. So he came into Revizto and made a comment like, "Hey, this thing is 20 foot and it's like 9,000 pounds, you know, and it's going on the roof. We're gonna have to get a crane, and a crane is $8,000." So, and he was like, "What if we just?" He's like, "I'm thinking outside the box here, you know. But what if we just like made it 10 foot and sent it up the man lift instead?" And it just like a light bulb went off, you know, like, oh my gosh, it's not necessarily the footage that matters. It's stuff like delivering the pipe to where it goes. How are you going to get it through the door? Like, does it need to be cut up a certain way to be able to be handled that way? And in this instance, we saved $8,000 by splitting it into 2 spools and making 2 welds instead of 1, you know? So that whole immersion from the whole team and giving everybody the ability, I was not looking at things like that. I was trying to make sure that this 45 was on this so that they could actually roll it and get their threadlets up and down. You know, I was thinking about stuff like that they were teaching me. Never did I think about actual material procurement and getting it on and off the truck and onto the site. So again, it's just the level of detail you get into and being able to teach and learn by being in the model it's not comparable to much, in my opinion.
Oh, certainly. Pop back to that model for a second there and move forward. Move forward so I can see the chain falls.
Up here?
Just walk forward. Yeah. Okay, so this is one of those awesome examples of how we probably should be sharing this with owners and facilities maintenance people too. So you can order chain falls in a bunch of different sizes. I guarantee you they're not going to order chain falls in that size. Because if you put on, and this would be one that you catch in VR faster than anywhere else. But if you put on a headset and started walking around in there, you'd be like, no, I'm not. This isn't going to happen.
Yeah.
You hook and chain falls to the left and to the right. But again, like, you know, popping someone into the environment whose purpose in the design is different than yours. My purpose in this design would be the mechanical pipes. You know, maybe Travis was breaking up spools, but all of us have a purpose that we want to get out of whatever we're building. And theirs is going to be, you know, maintenance. And are these chains the right size? Do I want them hitting me in the head as I'm walking by? Do I think that it's necessary to have certain ones? You know, again, an entire collaboration team educating one another on what is the best practices is just something that it's very hard to do outside of, you know, after the fact, which is not when we want to be dealing with these things.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and that's a really good point. It's all about what people are looking at in here, and because there's another really good mistake that I'd always make, and this is a good example of it. Not that I necessarily know if this is right or wrong. I can see the bolts in the point cloud, which tells me that's a flange like this. But sometimes you have that, what is it, a raised face flange instead of a bolt on. It's actually, or weld neck that's actually welded on. That was another thing. Some owners don't want those weld necks because they might break or have bad experience, whatever reason they have, you know. Now somebody can jump in here and you just quickly see that without even trying.
Actually, hold on a second. Don't go anywhere. Double click on the piece right there. That's that flange piece. I want to see what that is. Is that the actual Vic extension? Yeah.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, this is pretty cool. This is interesting. So, okay, we're not trying to be overly nerdy, but this is a great example. So Victaulic also makes something that replaces the coupling with a flange. So you have the 2 fittings, one fitting like this one that's 8 inches long, that's going to be put up there and attached and bolted and then Vic coupled. And then there's one where it just attaches straight to that coupling. And it's a choice. It's really a choice. I prefer the choice they made here. But those are some other things where we're educating people. How do we actually want to build this? because there's multiple ways. Again, I can replace a Victaulic coupling with basically a flange face coupling. Well, it looks like a flange face and it goes right on the coupling, or I can do this, and this is a better way, but it means that the pipe's going to have to be 8 inches shorter. So again, just different styles of building, and having the chance to have a conversation with your foreman, with other people about how you want to build stuff. Super important, super important.
Yep.
To having a good, strong staff.
And what you saw right there, so this is what I would do. I still do it anytime John talks. I'm like a secretary taking notes on what he says. But like right there, I just added that into Revizto, and I said why. Use Vic flange because we have them in stock. So now I actually have that, and you could imagine if this was more of a lessons learned thing, like if we want to say Vic adds 8-inch extension, pretty much everything John just said right there, we could add into this chat. And then now I can assign this to a foreman, or if it's on site, and I need to jump in there and say, hey, we messed up, I need you to know this. I can jump in there, I can assign that to the foreman, or I can assign this to a detailer, and I can make all of those people see what comes of that, Yeah. And more importantly, go ahead, John.
I was going to say, even to take it one step further, if your fab shop, your welding shop's in here and they look at this and they go, hey man, why did you just buy a fitting and a coupling when I can take a slip-on flange and weld it on in an hour? There's no way to beat me at that. I'll groove the pipe, I'll weld on a slip-on flange. And all of a sudden you just learned, what are the capabilities of my fab shop? Well, I learned that on 8-inch pipe, if I have to buy 2 Victaulic fittings, let's let them weld it. They can do it faster, And if I'm an owner, I actually want to see that welded on anyway. So those are the types of things that I think really come out of this quickly. And I would even encourage you, you had a lunch and learn where you went up there with specific thoughts and ideas, like we're going to teach steam. Have a lunch and learn where you take everybody up and you just walk a model with them, making issues about how could we have done this better, or do a post-mortem in Revizto, where the whole point of it is how can we better educate our people to understand how we want to build. Yeah, look, man, they had to buy 2 8-inch fittings, an 8-inch Vic coupling and that 8-inch. Yeah. I guarantee you, man, somebody can groove a piece of carbon steel and weld a slip-on flange cheaper.
Yeah, and it's
we move. Oh, 10-inch. Why is it 10-inch? I thought it was 8.
Do we have a model discrepancy? Let's see. And the beauty of it is that now we can click and check all of this stuff, instead of going back and forth and responding to a phone call 3 days later when somebody's all angry because they had to just wing it. Now we can check it live. For some reason, I'm lagging.
I don't know, man. It actually looks like there's a valve handle there, which is really awesome because there's no way anyone's ever going to reach that. But,
right
you
there.
See what I mean? Like the second you're in there and you start to digest the models that are actually being built, you're going to come up with a whole bunch of questions like, why is there a valve handle there and there's, chain falls on everything else, or chain actuators on all the other valves, and it's a great way to learn. It's a great way to sort of take your team and start building that team that's experienced, because while they can't build every job or be active on every job, they can certainly look around the job with this, and having all that rich data is just going to make it all that much easier to perform. You know what I mean?
And there we just realized something's wrong with the actual parts in the spool. Whatever they ordered is wrong.
Yeah, see, that's not good.
Yeah.
Design issue too.
Been there, done that. Oh man. But the cool thing about this and the beauty of having this conversation in here rather than on phone or email or whatever is that you can come in here and I can just add a tag. Once this is resolved, so you can see I've been adding banter. Ideally, you'd have the fab guy in here saying what John said. Hey, I can weld it in 5 minutes though. We have to order this. It's going to take 2 weeks. Stuff like that can come up. And then we just come in here and I would add a lessons learned tag. And I was kind of the loud guy in the office because we kept hiring new people and kept throwing them into the deep end. And so I was being really loud when I'd make a mistake, and I would add a lessons learned, and then I'd go around and show everybody, hey, go in here, I would actually make a lessons learned filter. And I'd be like, go in there and go through that list before you make any spools on that other job. Because here are all the mistakes I made. There's a picture of me one day. That was the mistake, taking the picture. But like here, there's something not up to code. You know, we can just go through this list real quick, and then we can actually jump right into it in 3D and look around at it. So I'm not just I don't just have a stagnant markup. You know, I have all of that information. This was another one. The fab shop doesn't want dimensions like this. Why would you dimension off the center of a Vic flange? You know, you're going to pull that off of the end of pipe to center line of pipe, period. Nothing else matters.
Okay, no. This is awesome. So I would disagree and say that my pipe cutter wants to know if I'm 6 inch from the end, unless I have an automated pipe cutter. And that's the thing is like you'll see, I remember we had this all the time. Me and him would go back and forth on what's the best way to do each situation. But this is a good, again, like a really good example of we're recording it, we're talking about it, we're getting it into the team where you can bring people that have different points of view. Like my point of view is always, I have an automatic pipe cutter and I know some dude might, you know, he's going to have to check it. The easiest way to check it's against that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So really good examples, man. Really good example.
Yep, I've made those mistakes, so that's why my examples are so good.
I think we're almost up against time. We're going to show them like one more thing, weren't you though?
Basically, I was going to talk about the way it works across teams, and I feel like we've kind of tackled that here. So basically, I just wanted to point out how it accelerates that learning. Like John was able to learn Revit in like a few weeks rather than a couple years, you know. I mean, mainly because I was outside the door and he was screaming at me every time something went wrong. But for the most part, I could go in there and like John would say, hey, I like he'd actually Revizto it to me. I can't get this stupid thing to show up as a link. I can't color it green. And I'd be like, hit these shortcuts. Here's a quick video of it, you know. I use GreenShot so I can go function print screen, and I can just screenshot something real quick, copy it to my clipboard, and then go over here in Revizto, and I could just drop that too. I could actually mark it up and say, this one, you know. And now that's in there as an image. And this works with real images too. So if somebody was out on site with working on a heat exchanger and they're trying to tell me, hey, you got the wrong size heat exchanger here, they could snap a picture of it and then circle and say, hey, this is 8-inch pipe. That connection's 10-inch. What do I do? You know? And now all of that lives here across the team. I could take that right from the field straight to John, who's in charge of BIM, and then we can sit down with Fab, or I can go straight to Fab, but it's just a streamline of information across your teams. And that was basically what I wanted to touch on with this slide.
I think the last thing that I'd say before we close out is, you know, when I went to do consulting, I think the first phone call I made was to Revizto to say, I'd like to use Revizto to help me understand the people that I'm going to work with. And it wasn't that I even needed them to have Revizto. I needed to get their projects into Revizto so I could see how they build things. Because what this gives you is such an easy way to go through, tag, and sort of digest where people are at in their projects. I can take somebody who's doing a good job with fabrication, look at their model, and tell almost immediately what equipment they're using, because that's the way they broke up their model, you know. And you go into these models from some of these people that say they're at a level 400 BIM and they know what they're doing, and you look for 2 minutes and you're like, no. And they ask you why, and you say this, you know, or take an estimating model and go in there and tag it up. The fastest way for me to learn a job is not for me to go through a ton of PDFs. It's for me to fly the model in somewhere where I can tag stuff, and somewhere where I can cross-reference stuff. I can't see a faster way for me to learn a job than in Revizto. I can't see it.
Yep, and the fact that it ties in that design model with the actual, with what you're working on, you know, you could bring in somebody asked a question earlier about multiple uploads. You can bring in a federated Navis model with everything but your mechanical stuff, and then bring in your mechanical stuff from Revit, you know? So you always have that context of, oh, this is why there's a hole in the floor over there. There's going to be a fish tank there someday, you know, or whatever you don't see, you're able to see it now. So, and it's all in one place. That's what's powerful. All right, well, we are at the top of the hour. Are there any questions? I appreciate anybody who stuck around to the end. Nice. We got a question from Mr. James Fleming, Holiday Parks. There was a mention of being able to mark up a comment attachment. I see a screenshot ability, but not a comment attachment. What about multi-page PDFs?
You can do you can do all of those.
Well, the multi-page PDF thing, so there is a workflow, and I can jump on that with you offline, James, to do that. I think we've talked about that, but basically you have to set up a folder. Revizto only reads, it'll take your multi-page PDF and break them into individual PDFs.
One thing to keep in mind is that if you can attach a multi-page PDF to an issue. So there are two ways to use the PDFs, right? You can attach one to an issue as a attachment that gives further context into that issue, or the PDFs can be part of the actual issue creation 2D process. So that's just figured I'd point that out.
So what Brett's saying is this is where you can attach a multi-page PDF. And then in 2D over here, these are where you're going to want to make a folder, and it's going to actually break them out into multiple pages.
And when you auto upload a screenshot, it automatically prompts you to go into markup mode, right? When you copy paste a screenshot into an issue, doesn't it prompt you immediately to go into markup? Yeah.
Yep.
It'll bring you straight into markup. If that doesn't work, definitely download GreenShot. It's freeware, and it has an editor in it that's faster and nicer than the Snap It tool. I think even you still use GreenShot, right?
Absolutely. That's what I just did here. I love it. It's
yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So that's my plug for GreenShot. I've been using it for like the last 10 years. It's awesome.
Yeah.
But Revizto marks it up right away.
So I think what James is asking there is if I upload a multi-page PDF, and Brett, you'll probably know the answer to this. If I upload a multi-page PDF to this, can I mark it up? I don't know that I've tried that before. Or would he want to use screenshots?
It would definitely create a screenshot. So in there, it just gives access to the multi-page PDF for reference. If it's a JPEG or a PNG or a 360 photo, there will be a markup button for it, but I do not believe it is there for multi-page PDF.
Gotcha, and that was my understanding too. So James, in your situation, you'd want to upload the PDF, and then you can open up that PDF and use GreenShot to quickly grab any information that you want and put it as a screenshot, a marked up screenshot right below it, you know. And we would do that with PNIDs and everything. So I understand the need for that for sure. Anything else? All righty, guys. Well, I definitely appreciate everybody who stayed after. This was a great conversation. I think we should keep it going, especially with what I said earlier, that we're kind of making our own books now. You know, books are falling off as the method of going and finding stuff. And why not use like something like Revizto to write your own book, you know, your own manual, and get all of your team's input? Because there's nothing worse than writing a manual as the BIM guy, only to hand it to the field guy and have the field guy like, I'm not using that. I don't agree with what's in it, you know? So this way we can have all of our input in our own book for our company and make sure we do everything across the board the same and make a lot of money. That's what it's all about. All righty. Well, no more questions. I appreciate it, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.